Welcome to Legal Studies, and today we're going to be learning about the bicameral structure of the Commonwealth Parliament. So where are we in the study design? Here we are right here. We've just started this dot point, which is about the means by which the Constitution acts as a check on Parliament in lawmaking. And this is the first of those sub-dot points. So essentially what we're learning about with all of these sub-dot points here is what are the things that our Constitution does to try and prevent Parliament from abusing its power? What are the different protections we have in place? And for all of these sub-dot points we're going to learn about, you're going to need to know strengths and weaknesses. What are the ways in which it's effective at preventing abuse, and what are the ways in which it's not so effective? And that's what we mean by a check on Parliament. So for today's topic, we're looking at the bicameral structure of Parliament. And what do you need to do? Well, first of all, you need to know what it is. And then, as I said, you need to provide strengths and weaknesses, reasons why it will act as a check on Parliament and reasons why it won't check Parliament, stop them from making law, reasons why it won't be able to do that. So, as I said, you're going to look at a number of ways in which the Constitution tries to act as a protection. Today, we're going to focus on the bicameral structure. And what is that? Well, you should be familiar with it already. It's the idea that we have two houses of Parliament. We've got our lower house, which is the House of Representatives, and we've got our upper house, which is the Senate. And each of them serves slightly different roles, and by having these two slightly different houses, that's one of the ways that we try and protect ourselves from a government that's trying to overreach, protect ourselves from a government that's trying to abuse its power. So how exactly does this bicameral system do that? What are the ways in which it does act as a check or does restrict Parliament? And what are the ways in which it's not going to be particularly effective at restricting Parliament? Well, first of all, one of the main functions of our Houses of Parliament is debate. And I'll start actually with this column, the ways in which this system actually isn't so effective. We know that in the lower house, the House of Representatives, the government controls that house. They've got the numbers to pass any vote that they want. And so no amount of debate in the lower house is actually going to stop Parliament at all. On the other hand, if we think about the fact that, well, it's not just the lower house, we have a bicameral system, there are two houses, well, the Senate is usually not controlled by the government. And so debate about a bill in the Senate can actually stop Parliament from making a law. It can actually cause the government to have to take other ideas on board. It can have to force them to amend a bill or stop trying to pass it entirely if people don't agree with it. So by having two houses, it does allow for a place where debate can prevent Parliament from just forcing a bill through if it's not a good bill. And then thinking then a little bit deeper about what role the Senate actually plays in acting as a check on Parliament. Again, starting with the weaknesses, it's possible that we have what's called a rubber stamp Senate. And that's what happens when the government gets control of the upper house. So if the government has control of the lower house, and then it also happens to win enough seats in the election to control the upper house as well, that means they can pass any law that they want. All right, no matter what the other parties say, no matter what anyone says during debate, if they've got the numbers in the lower house and they've got the numbers in the upper house, they can just pass any law they want. And that has happened in Australian history. On the other hand, usually our Senate does act as a pretty effective check on Parliament's lawmaking. And this can happen if there's what we call a hostile Senate. So if the opposition is the one that controls the upper house, if the opposition has the numbers in the upper house, then they could theoretically prevent any law from passing and totally restrict Parliament's lawmaking. But a more common scenario is the government has to negotiate with minor parties or independents in the Senate, and they have to take their views into account and maybe amend their legislation a little bit. And so they're still able to pass laws, but if they're trying to pass something that we perceive as an abuse of power or corrupt or something, then the Senate usually does a pretty good job of being able to shut that down by forcing them to negotiate with the opposition or the minor parties. We've also got question time. as a way of our Houses of Parliament acting as a check on government lawmaking. So, for example, question time can raise embarrassing questions for the government. If they've done a bad job, or if they're trying to pass a law that is no good, or is perhaps an abuse of power, or that the people might not like, question time allows the opposition to stand up and highlight this, and highlight what the government's doing and say, hey, you're trying to pass this awful law, explain yourself. And they're forced to answer those questions during question time. And so any bad publicity that results from that might actually make them abandon the bill. If people learn about this law that they're making that's no good, the government might start getting worried and say, all right, we'll can it. We won't pass it. On the other hand, thinking about the weaknesses here, yes, question time can raise embarrassing questions for the government, but it's not going to do anything to directly stop them from passing a law. So it's not exactly a really hard check. All right, it's not going to stop them from passing a law directly. And then finally, another weakness, another way in which our bicameral system doesn't exactly stop Parliament from making law, is that members of Parliament have to vote along party lines, usually. So what that means is if you're a member of the Labor Party, you have to vote the way that the Labor Party tells you to vote. And same thing if you're a member of the Liberal Party. You vote with all of your colleagues in your party. And so even if the government is trying to pass a law that you really personally disagree with and you think it's really a bad law, usually you have to vote along with your own party. If you don't, you could get kicked out, chucked out of your party. And so even if there's a bad law that's potentially being passed, often members of parliament feel like they have to vote for it anyway, even if they personally disagree with it. And that's a weakness in the way in which our bicameral system operates. It means that less often than it should, individual members aren't actually getting the chance to weigh in and stop a bad law from happening. So that's the main idea that we need to know today. We need to know what is a bicameral system, this idea of two houses of parliament, and what are the ways in which it can restrict parliament from abusing its power, and what are the ways in which it's not so effective at doing that. See you next time.